It started on a quiet Sunday morning, in a gated community where manicured lawns and pristine sidewalks painted the illusion of safety. But beneath the surface lay something darker, a prejudice so strong it could shatter lives in an instant. When a black homeowner, living in peace, stepped outside his front door, a group of self-proclaimed HOA police surrounded him, demanding his compliance. They carried fake badges, fake authority, and a very real sense of entitlement. What they didn't know was this: the man they targeted wasn't just another resident. He was one of the most feared FBI agents in the country, and they had just picked the wrong man. The man's name was Marcus Hayes. To his neighbors, he was quiet, reserved, and private. He kept his lawn neat, drove a modest SUV, and waved politely when spoken to. What few people realized was that Marcus had dedicated 20 years of his life to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. His specialty was dismantling criminal organizations, gangs, white-collar fraud rings, and even international cartels. Behind his calm demeanor was a mind trained to notice every detail, every inconsistency, every sign of deception. But in his neighborhood, none of that mattered. To some, Marcus wasn't a respected federal agent. He was simply a black man who, in their eyes, didn't belong. The Homeowners Association, a group meant to protect community standards, had slowly turned into something else entirely. A collection of power-hungry individuals who policed not just lawns and paint colors, but people. And they had been watching Marcus. Whispers spread at board meetings. Why did he keep his curtains closed? Why was his car parked in the driveway instead of the garage? Why did a man like him afford a home in such a neighborhood? The undertones were clear, even if unspoken. Marcus didn't fit the image they wanted to preserve. So one evening, when Marcus invited his brother's family over for a barbecue, the self-appointed enforcers of the HOA saw their chance. They called themselves the HOA Police, a group of men who took it upon themselves to keep order. They ordered uniforms online, flashed badges they had no right to carry, and convinced themselves they had authority. What they didn't know was that their next move would set off a chain of events that would reveal not only their prejudice, but also the full weight of the man they tried to intimidate. The night began like any other family gathering. Marcus's backyard filled with laughter, the smell of grilled food, and the sound of kids running around on the lawn. For Marcus, these moments were rare and precious, moments when the world's chaos faded into the background. But as dusk settled, headlights appeared at the edge of his driveway. 4 men stepped out of a truck, dressed in dark uniforms that mimicked law enforcement attire. They didn't knock. They didn't announce themselves properly. They walked straight into Marcus's yard. The mood shifted instantly. The laughter stopped. His brother looked at him with unease. The kids grew quiet. The men demanded identification, insisting Marcus was in violation of community rules and that his unauthorized gathering had to end. Their tone carried the weight of authority, but their badges, cheap and flimsy, betrayed the truth. They weren't police. They were neighbors who had elevated their prejudice into a performance of power. Marcus's training kicked in. He noticed their nervous hands, their attempt to project dominance, the way their eyes flickered with uncertainty when he didn't immediately comply. He said little, but inside his mind was working faster than theirs could imagine. He noted details: the license plate, the stitching on their fake patches, the way one of them adjusted his belt as though he carried a weapon. To his family, it looked like Marcus was cornered. But Marcus was calculating. He wasn't just a man under scrutiny. He was an FBI agent trained to dismantle threats, and right now, the threat was standing in his own backyard. As the confrontation dragged on, the neighbors watching from behind curtains and across lawns grew restless. Phones recorded. Whispers spread. To them, it looked like the HOA police had caught someone guilty of something. That's how racism often works. Perception is enough to convict, but Marcus knew better. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't escalate. Instead, he calmly excused himself, walked inside, and made one phone call. Not to the local police. He knew how complicated that could get. No, Marcus dialed directly to a federal office where his name carried weight. Within minutes, the gears were turning. The men outside grew bolder, emboldened by what they thought was silence. They ordered Marcus's family to disperse. They threatened fines, even arrest. And with each passing second, they dug themselves deeper into a hole they wouldn't be able to climb out of. For Marcus, the hardest part wasn't facing them. It was watching his young niece clutch her mother's hand, eyes wide with fear, asking if her uncle was going to be taken away. That moment, more than anything else, steeled his resolve. These men had turned an innocent family gathering into a battlefield of intimidation, and soon they would learn just how costly that mistake would be. The sound of sirens broke the night's tension. Real law enforcement vehicles pulled into the street, their lights illuminating the staged uniforms of the so-called HOA police. The neighbors who had been watching began to scatter, unsure of what was unfolding. The fake enforcers straightened their posture, trying to act legitimate, but the illusion crumbled the moment real officers approached. One by one, the badges were examined. One by one, the excuses began. We were just doing our duty. We're authorized by the HOA. We were only keeping the peace. But before anyone could spin further lies, the senior officer on the scene made an announcement that froze everyone in place. Marcus Hayes wasn't just a resident. He was a decorated FBI agent, and he had personally requested this response team. The men's faces drained of color. The arrogance that had carried them onto Marcus's property vanished, replaced with the realization that they had attempted to impersonate law enforcement, an offense carrying serious federal consequences. As the officers began reading out charges, Marcus finally spoke, not in anger, but with the kind of steady authority that only someone in his position could carry. He outlined every detail he had noted, every law they had violated, every action that would be documented. His words were calm, but they cut sharper than any shout. The crowd of neighbors who had assumed Marcus was guilty now saw the truth laid bare. Their prejudices had fueled silence, complicity, even approval of the fake enforcers' actions. And now, under the glare of flashing lights, the community saw not a suspect, but the man who had been protecting the country from real threats for decades. For the first time, the HOA police weren't in control. And for the first time, Marcus allowed himself a small, grim smile. The fallout was swift. The men who called themselves the HOA police were arrested on multiple charges, impersonating law enforcement, trespassing, harassment, and conspiracy. Their carefully constructed facade collapsed under the weight of federal law. The Homeowners Association scrambled to distance itself, insisting they never authorized such actions. But emails, texts, and recorded conversations told another story, one where prejudice and entitlement had quietly festered until it erupted in an attempt to strip a man of his dignity. Marcus didn't seek revenge. He didn't celebrate their downfall. What he did was more powerful. He used the moment as a lesson. At a town meeting weeks later, he stood before the same neighbors who once doubted him and spoke not as an FBI agent, but as a man who wanted better for his community. He reminded them that safety and order don't come from intimidation. They come from trust, respect, and equality. He told them that prejudice doesn't always wear a hood or shout slurs. Sometimes it hides behind rules, regulations, or the illusion of authority. And he asked them to consider this. If they had spoken up sooner, if they had questioned the self-proclaimed HOA police before things escalated, how different might the night have been? The room was silent, but the message was undeniable. Marcus returned to his quiet life, still reserved, still private. But the shadow of what had happened lingered in the community. It became a story whispered at block parties, shared with newcomers, and remembered as the night the HOA police tried to take down the wrong man. And for those who witnessed it, the lesson remained. Racism doesn't always come in the form you expect. Sometimes it arrives with a badge, a uniform, and false authority. The question is, will you recognize it and will you stand against it before it's too late?